Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of investment spending. In this particular video, we're going to graph the investment demand curve, okay? It's important to understand when we do this that to do the investment demand curve, we need to first graph the expected real rate of return curve. And the expected real rate of return curve is the investment demand curve. I know that's a little bit confusing, but let me parallel this with something. Remember how the supply curve is the marginal cost curve? Well, it's the same concept here. The investment demand curve for business projects is the expected real rate of return curve. In other words, the expected real rate of return of business projects is the marginal benefit of business projects to the demander of those projects. You see, all supply curves are based on the marginal cost of what is being supplied. And all demand curves are based on the marginal benefit of what is being demanded. And the marginal benefit of an investment project is its expected real rate of return. I've got some data up here. Okay, this is from our last video. For project A, we're going to spend $10 million, and our expected real rate of return is 10% on that $10 million. But another way to say that, to really get to the marginal benefit aspect of this, is we're going to make a 10% return on each dollar that we spend on project A. So on each of the $10 million, we're going to make a 10% return on each one of those dollars. Hence the term marginal benefit, or the benefit of spending one extra dollar on that project. So up to $10 million, we're going to make a return of 10%. So, where are we at right now? We're supposed to understand that the investment demand curve is absolutely based on the expected real rate of return curve for business projects. And the expected real rate of return of business projects is simply their marginal benefit. And so the big picture concept here is investment demand is a demand curve, and all demand curves are based on the marginal benefit of the thing you are demanding. Just like all supply curves are based on the marginal cost curve of the thing you are supplying. All right, with that said, let's get to something more concrete. Let's actually graph this data right here. Once again, like I said, this data is coming from video 1, so you want to watch that one first. But here's the data. I've taken out a couple rows, but the data from that video. So how am I going to graph this information onto this so that it communicates the investment demand curve? Well, to understand that, I need to understand that the investment demand curve is going to tell me the quantity of investment spending I'm going to get at every single interest rate. It's going to actually tell me the quantity of investment spending I'm going to get at each interest rate. But, like I said, to get the investment demand curve, I want to first start thinking about the expected real rate of return curve. So let me graph that, and that curve, that expected real rate of return curve, is going to be our investment demand curve. So, these percentages here at the beginning, I want you to think of them as the expected real rate of return of business projects. I've got this data. Let me take this data that shows the expected real rate of return of business projects and put it on this graph. What I'm going to start with first are the projects that have the highest expected real rate of return. It so happens I have 2 projects that have a 20% return. So I'm going to put those on my graph first. So I'm going to go up to 20%, okay, which is taken right from here. And I'm going to say there is $15 million worth of projects that will provide an expected real rate of return of 20%. So 20%. I'm going to go right to here, $15 million, and this is our first dot, which might surprise a few of us. A few of us might think, well, shouldn't you graph either C first or E first and then the other project afterwards? And the answer is no. You see, a business is going to do these projects, okay, is going to do all $15 million worth of projects as long as the interest rate, the cost of doing a project, is less than the expected real rate of return. Whether or not that business already had the money from their profits or if they have to borrow it. No matter what, if that interest rate gets below 20%, the business is definitely going to do both projects. Even if they only had $5 million, that's fine. They would borrow the other $10 million. So what I like to say is our first coordinate on this graph is going to be right here at 20% and 15 million. Now, what's the next coordinate I'm going to put? I'm going to look for my next highest projects, which are Project A and Project D. They provide for an expected real rate of return of 10%. So I'm going to put 10% right here. And now I'm going to be cumulative, okay? I'm going to add that 30 million. Where did I get that 30 million from? 10%, 10 million, 10%, 20 million. So 30 million. I'm going to add that 30 million to my original 15 million. 45 million. So that is right, we are being cumulative, and the reason we're being cumulative is if the interest rate dropped below 10%, we would continue to do these first two projects, but then we would also do these projects, okay? In other words, how much would we spend if the interest rate drops below 10%? We would spend $45 million because we would do projects A, C, D, and E. The final coordinate I'm going to put on the graph is for this project, Project B, with an expected real rate of return of 5%. The lowest benefits for doing this project, right? The business is going to get the smallest benefits for this project. They will only do this project if the interest rate drops below 5%. They'll only do the project if the interest rate drops below 5%, okay? So these dots right here, this graph I've got up here, which is a stepwise function, right now I would like to say it is communicating the expected real rate of return of business projects. But it is also communicating the investment demand curve. It is communicating both. Why is that? Well, once again, let's go back to what I said the investment demand curve was supposed to communicate. It's supposed to communicate the quantity of investment spending we'll get at every interest rate. And you see these percentages, yes, I can see them as the expected real rate of return, but I can also see them as the real interest rate, which I've already kind of been doing in this video. If you watch this video again, you'll see I've already said real interest rate several times when referring to this axis. So once again, to be clear, I'm seeing these percentages as two things. I'm seeing them as the expected real rate of return of projects, but I'm also seeing them as the real interest rate. And so here is why, what I'm about to say is going to be why the curve gives us the investment demand curve. You saw how I created the curve based on the of projects. Now that communicates the investment demand curve because here's how it goes. If the interest rate was, say, 24%, how many projects would we do? The answer is 0. Why? Because we have no projects that have a benefit greater than that interest rate, okay? An expected real rate of return greater than the interest rate. If the interest rate dropped, say, to 15%, how many projects would we do? We would do 15 million. Why is that? We've got $15 million worth of projects that will provide us with a benefit greater than the interest rate. And remember, the interest rate is a form of cost when you do a project, okay? Why is it a cost of doing a project? Well, if you have to borrow money to do the project, it's an explicit cost. You've got to pay that interest. But even if you have your own profits, if you're a business that has your own profits, can use those to do your project, the interest rate is still a cost because it would be the foregone benefits of the alternative use of that money, which would be put that money into the financial market and make the interest rate. Okay? So no matter what, the interest rate is the cost of doing an investment project, whether or not you borrow the money or if you have your own money on hand from your profits. Now, if the interest rate dropped down to, say, 8%, how much investment spending would I do? $45 million, or at least this business would do that much. And if the interest rate dropped down to, say, 3%, this business would do $65 million worth of project. So this curve is communicating the investment demand curve. It is communicating the quantity of investment spending that we're going to get at every single real interest rate. So once again, all demand curves are marginal benefit curves. And the of projects is communicating the marginal benefit of those projects to the business. Okay, I hope that helped. I'll see you in the next video.